Welcome to the Cable Depot. I'm very happy to be here. My name is Stephen J. Fowler with Ed Hadfield.
Greetings.
This is Ed's digital gallery opening.
That's the one? That's the one?
Yeah, it is a great loss to us that we cannot have beautiful openings to celebrate great work like this because of the pandemic, but we are making the best of it.
Yeah. And just to say, Stephen's kindly holding the phone because of the wind. There's a whole lot of wind around here, so we're going to have to keep the camera very movable and the chat close to the microphone. So that's why you're seeing this sort of slightly random setup. And thanks to Steve for being both questioner and cameraman.
It's a joy. It's very beautiful here, it has to be said. It is a wonderful evening, so it is a special kind of celebration in a strange way, we must adapt.
Okay.
Congratulations, Ed, on this amazing work.
Thanks,
That is here behind you. If you don't mind, I'm going to ask you some questions about your work to introduce it.
Yeah.
So I know that one of the key elements of your work in general, especially this work, is the idea of experiential experience with people, reading of the text and the way they encounter it. Maybe you could expand on that just a tiny bit.
Yeah, I mean, I've just always enjoyed those tiny little moments that just can pass you by quite quickly, and they often contain just a real sense of sort of mental and bodily pleasure, and those are the sorts of things that I like to capture, and those are the sorts of things that I'm trying to convey in the poetry, and also maybe open people's minds up to the possibility themselves without sounding sort of patronising, but these sort of things are out there to grab for free, and they're really, really nice.
Yeah, this seems to be part of we talked about this a little bit before, like a positive, engaged, open poetics. You don't want your work to be this modernist stereotype of the agonised artist, right? You want your art to be engaging with people in a generous way, in a way that actually does interrupt their daily experience and does something kind of, framed.
Definitely, yeah. So I mean, my practice is positive, constructive sort of proposition, and as you're sort of just hinting at there, with the exterior sort of framing, there is that sort of sense of a sort of interruption because you wouldn't normally sort of see this type of thing. And then just going back to what we were talking about a few moments ago, this sort of experiential knowledge, just to build into that, my key thinkers is sort of John Dewey, the pragmatist philosopher. He's all about unified experiences. Then there's a contemporary philosopher, Richard Schusterman, sort of all about fragmented experiences. And then there's Sherry Irvin, a Canadian philosopher, and she's all about just capturing those experiences, binding them in a notebook, before they fall back into the sort of everyday flux and movement of existence. So that's sort of what I'm trying to do in my practice, is to sort of just capture those moments, whether they're unified or fragmented, and turn them into a poetic form.
So in a way, it's a kind of intervention. It's like a very open, generous, artistic, poetic intervention into people's lives. You're trying to get them to bracket off a moment where they experience your artwork and kind of gain something from that.
Yeah, hopefully they would gain or just have a pleasurable moment floating around in the sort of imaginative response to the poem, and also hopefully they might just think, why am I not out there myself, just taking a walk, as this poem was. This poem was captured walking up Blackheath on the heath near Greenwich. Just suddenly sort of pop, this sort of experiential moment popped up in front of me, and why not open your eyes also to that?
Amazing. So it seems in a way a really key element of that is the sense that it's part of your normal, organic, lived life, that you're not going out to seek some experience to generate artwork, but you're just trying to be open and receptive to these experiences and then transform them into something again.
That's exactly it. It's if you wanted to say it was a performative practice, then it would be a naturally performative, the everyday goings on. My mind is open to those.
Yeah.
That's the one.
Do you think there's something that happens to a lot of artists when they become professionalised in their thinking, that they somehow are looking for things to convert into art, and that becomes a problem sometimes?
Yeah, and I think that's in some respects, trying to become a professional artist, that's a problem for me, because that's a bracket you're almost pushed into, that you must have this key area of focus, and it must be based around something that you can research in a library. Whereas actually, what I like to research is the pragmatist philosophy behind it, such as John Dewey's unified experiences, which just means fragmented experiences, the way to bind them through Irving, but not actually the subject. The subject matter is at large, it's out there, it could be anything. It could be eating a pizza, reading a book, taking the dog for a walk, or whatever.
And I know also more kind of in my area of interest in poetry, objectivism, an American early 20th century, mid 20th century movement, George Oppen and Charles Reznikoff and people like that's quite important to you, is that right?
Yeah, that's the one. Yeah, I mean, I was like, when I was starting out with my practice, I was like, searching around, and actually, the objectivist movement was very sort of apt. One of their key phrases is thinking with things as they exist, which, as you can sort of see, sort of connects nicely with experiential knowledge in the present moment. And the other thing, actually, which they sort of tie in is thinking with things as they exist, and tying the line along a line of melody. So it's that sort of notion of rhythm and rhyme. And actually, that was something that has been missing from my practice for like 5 years. The feeling of language. I've been working with like verbo-visual poetry and conceptual word art for about 5 years, and I was really, really trying to push my practice towards this feeling of language. And that's probably particularly why I'm very pleased with these pieces, because I seem to have managed to sort of open up that avenue for myself. I think actually at the time of writing this, of creating this piece, I was also researching like rhythm and rhyme technique. Like just reading books on it really, and like it's sort of like, I don't know, stanzas and rhythms and offbeat rhythms and all this sort of stuff. And it was sort of literally like, as I was experiencing this moment up on the heath, I just had this sort of like sort of technical vocabulary about how it was that you're trying to sort of like interpret experience through rhythm and through rhyme, and that was really like what I was working at, and hopefully what I've achieved here.
Yeah, maybe we could see the text behind you.
Sure.
I don't know if you want to read it, or I can read it. It's up to you.
I'll have a crack.
Yeah, go on.
Yeah, green, blue, the sweet smell of sun-baked dew.
So this is kind of something that's more readily associated with poetic technique, as opposed to, let's not get into the strange delineations between text art, mural art, poetry. Yeah. It doesn't really matter. These things don't necessarily have any import apart from genre ideas and the way people study things. But it is safe to say, I think, if one is okay to be generalised about it, that a lot of, say, public art based around text tends to not have rhythm and rhyme and that kind of open poetics where the semantic construction of the text is so key. It tends to be more either ironized or declarative statements or pure minimalism.
Yeah.
So that's something kind of different. That's something that you're doing that maybe a lot of text artists or mural artists aren't doing. Were you kind of mindful of that on the journey?
Yeah, I think I was mindful of bringing like a felt poem into the public arena, and I think there was a couple of things guiding me. Initially, this other movement called New Sincerity Movement, and they're very keen on lyric subjectivity and also bringing like poetry to a wider audience using graphic design techniques and advertising sort of like techniques. So that was something that was in my mind. The other thing that was in my mind was the notion of colour. And often when you're like, with sort of like conceptual word art or verbo-visual word art or anything in the public arena, it often demands colour to stand out. So this piece was originally designed on Instagram so that I could find myself a wall. And I'd like to thank Ivor, who's behind here, curator of the museum, Cable Depot Art Gallery, for lending me this wall. And the work's actually going to be up for next year, so please pop down and see the work if you fancy. It was originally designed for Instagram, and I designed it with colour, and it had like a sort of golden background, like a main ground, and then a slightly fainter typographic font, which sort of stood out a bit brighter in the terms of faintness. And the idea was that the typography was my body, and the ground was the landscape, and they were sort of rubbing closely together in that sort of experiential element. But my problem was that, of course, it became a colour field. The piece became a colour field rather than about the feeling of the words. And so I took a big risk because if there were any expectations about this work, it was that it was going to be colourful in a sense, rather than about the feeling of the words. So I removed the colour to allow the audience to have a purely imaginative response just to the words, just to the rhythm, just to the feeling of the words, just to float away with that. And a problem with the colour field is that it just interrupts that proposition. it just sort of stops it. You can't see beyond the colour, you can't see beyond the framing field. You just always come back to it. I think in sort of fine art practices they talk about a signifier, like a double signifier, as if it's an advantage. And actually, I don't think it is an advantage at all. It might double signify it, but it actually blocks the imaginative response. Yeah, so I really, really moved away from that. But what I was really excited about with this piece was to be paring down visuality just to the typographic elements and the graphic design display. I'll just talk about that for a moment. I mean,
I know typography is really, really important to you, right?
Yeah, I've been working with typography for 5 years, but only with the transport font for my street signs.
Right.
So these new two works, I probably read 4 typography books to get my head around sort of typography. I came to sort of use the Gill Sans font. Most people are familiar with its sort of humanistic and characterful sort of qualities, which seem to sort of tie in nicely with the sort of soma aesthetic, body-mind, experiential element, which is Richard Schusterman.
Right.
Tying in with all that sort of pragmatist philosophy. And the other thing which was important was the way the poem was laid across this sort of landscape frame, breaking in the normal poetic tradition, but also it's as you read the poem, it's meant to mimic the spacing of the typography is meant to mimic the experiential action of the poem itself.
Right, like projected verse in a way.
Yeah, I suppose. Yeah, the Charles Olson type thing.
Exactly.
I haven't gone into too much on that, but I'm certainly familiar with Charles Olson and projected verse. So yeah, you can run with that idea. I need to double check that.
I think that's it. Yeah, just the purposeful spacing of the elements of the text is there to replicate a kind of pace of reading or a gestural understanding of the text as it's laid out.
Absolutely. I think someone commented on the piece last week. That it's a bit like when you read the piece, like the landscape is breaking in front of you. It's unfolding in front of you. That would be like a key proposition, I suppose.
Yeah, it's a really balanced work. It's like it operates really successfully as a poem. Like it's a beautiful poem. It can appear in a book, but it's definitely the theoretical elements have really been used in a direct and practical way to engage with people, to actually break that kind of poetic tradition in the book where the page is flipped and the text is a kind of lost in a way. So what you've done, bracketing it out into this space, which is a really remarkable space here, it's really unique. It's really beautiful how you balance the different elements.
Thank you. Can I just mention one thing about the space? So I was Ivor, as I said, he offered me the wall, and the irony was that the wall originally had a massive concrete division down the middle. And I was like, Ivor, look, I'm making work off the page. It just looks like a page split in two. This is a bit of a problem. Can I rebuild your wall? So I built this wall with 105 kilos of MDF to make a nice smooth. So there's some battens. The old wall's under here. There's some battens holding this up. Yeah, so that was a bit of an experience in itself. And in a sense, we've sort of created a sort of landscape wall in a way. It was already that shape. And the other thing to point out, I suppose, is this is a really great industrial sort of park, and I suppose what am I trying to say here? Yeah, that was it. Just going back to contextualization and framing. What I decided when I decided not to use colour, I was like, how can I get away with not using colour? Because this piece needs to be framed. Unfortunately, I've just used the natural architectural design of the building to frame the piece. So there's a steel shutter on the left, there's the guttering along the top, the tar bitumen on the bottom, and the door on the right. I think that's sort of a sort of key thing for me. Is I've sort of done it before in my previous work actually. It's just really important in a public arena to make the best use of the natural architectural spacing and just push it as best as I can. And I was fortunate here to find a landscaped shaped wall to sit with some some poetry that deals with the body and the landscape.
And I think also it accentuates the poetic for it being in a space that's completely authentic and it's not falsified as kind of an art engagement. It feels like it's part of what's happening in the environment around it.
Thanks, Steve. So I chose, just to pick up on that, I chose this grey font, and I didn't want the grey font matches the grey steel shutters. There's a massive backdrop over here of a huge grey steel warehouse. So there's very much like a grey theme going through here. And I've forgotten the final bit I was going to say there.
Yeah, it's embedded, like you chose the colour of the font because of the environment.
That's it. And also I wanted to get away from, normally when you start to go for a white background, you just go for a black coloured font. And I was like, I must get away from this sort of newspeak, public announcement, advertorial, like wash your hands, for example, or that type of stuff. Like talking to the public directly. This is much more of a sort of subtle intervention, and a moment to be experienced and something perhaps to take away with you.
Yeah, amazing. And do you think the documentation of it, you might publish it in the future? Do you think you could ever see it in a book, or is it rooted into this space such to the extent that this is where it will be and never be anywhere else type thing?
Not at all. I think maybe like RTV accounts, secondary reproduction, tertiary reproductions. They're all cool with me. I've got a friend in Wales who's already asked for a poster. I said she'd be the first to have one if it went that way.
That's beautiful. I think it would work like that, and especially if the poster is picture image that documents the space around it, like you say, the metal shutters, the guttering. That is what really adds to the poetic element. Is bringing it out of itself.
Thanks, Steve.
And am I right in thinking that you've got individual viewings coming this weekend, and people can?
Yeah, that's it. If you've enjoyed the chat, and thanks for staying with us. If you've managed to stay with us, do pop down. I'm going to be here over the weekend and Monday, and actually, given that I was kindly going to keep it up for the next year, you can just pop down any time. But I personally will be here for
So this will be up for a whole calendar year.
I think so. That's the plan.
That is amazing. That's so cool. So people can bide their time, and as soon as they're able to come,
don't panic. And it's just opposite Thameside Studios. There's a lot of people around here who use the studios. It's just on the other side of Thameside Studios. So do pop over to Cable Depot. If you want to Google it, it's Submarine Cable Depot.
Yeah, until September 2021.
And I just want to say thanks to Steve for coming all the way over from North London. I've known Steve for about 6 years. It's very kind of him to come down here on this pretty windy day, really.
It's amazing. It's amazing to be here because the work is so beautiful in the setting, and as the sun goes down and the wind whips over, it is a proper moment. So congratulations, Ed.
Thanks, Steve.
Pleasure.
See you everyone later.